Hello everybody, this is Tyler here once again from the Character Workshop, and now we're finally at the end of Classic Doctor Who Season 1. So we're taking a look at story number 8 of the entirety of Doctor Who, and as I mentioned earlier, the final episode, the final story of Season 1. This one being the Reign of Terror. Now, this is interesting for a couple reasons. First off, unlike some of the previous stories that I've reviewed, over the past year or so, of Escape from England, where I've already watched them once before, a few years ago, and then I watched them again for the purposes of this review. For the Reign of Terror, this is my first time ever watching it. So everything that I'm seeing, happen in the story is stuff that I've seen for the first time, basically. Not only that, the Reign of Terror is also the first story that I'm covering on this series that has missing episodes. So, as I mentioned before, story number 4, Marco Polo, which I haven't reviewed yet, that story is completely missing. No episodes are available to watch, and obviously, as of right now, there's no animation of it. Now, with the Reign of Terror, which is 6 episodes long, episodes 1, 2, 3, and 6 exist in their entirety, so those 4 episodes are available in their original format. But since episodes 4 and 5 are missing, for the purposes to, have the story be fully watchable, episodes 4 and 5 were actually animated. So this is going to be the first time we'll be reviewing a missing Doctor Who story that's had its missing episodes animated. So I'll definitely not only be talking about the story itself, but also the animation of episodes 4 and 5 as I, as I go later on in the review. But anyways, let's not waste any more time. Let's talk about the Reign of Terror. So the story starts off with the Doctors Susan, Ian, and Barbara landing in 18th century France, which of course they weren't aware of at the time. They figured that they arrived in England to drop off Barbara and Ian, but of course eventually they later found out that they were wrong. Judging from the fact that they met a little boy who told them that they were actually in France and not in England, so everybody then, went around to find a nearby place, and they eventually found a farmhouse. And then while searching through the farmhouse, they find that it was being used as a staging post for an escape chain for counter-revolutionaries during the Reign of Terror, or the French Revolution. And then they were discovered by 2 counter-revolutionaries who knocked the Doctor unconscious and hold the other 3 at gunpoint. And then as they were interrogating Ian, Susan, and Barbara, a band of revolutionary soldiers come in and surround the house, and both of the people that captured Ian, Susan, and Barbara ended up getting killed during the siege. So the soldiers for the revolution captured Ian, Barbara, and Susan and marched them to Paris to get guillotined. And afterwards, the soldiers then set the farmhouse on fire, which led Ian, Susan, and Barbara to believe that the Doctor was still in there, unconscious, and probably, who knows what happened to him. But thankfully, the Doctor ended up getting out, being saved by the same boy from earlier, who tells the Doctor that the friends have been taken to the prison in Paris, and as soon as the Doctor finds out, he goes off after them. So Ian, Barbara, and Susan were then sentenced to death as traitors, Ian being confined in one cell, and then Barbara and Susan being confined into another. While Ian was in his cell, he met an Englishman by the name of Webster, who tells him that there was an English spy by the name of James Sterling, who was highly placed in the French government, who is now being recalled back to England. Webster then dies while still in the cell, and a government official named Lemierre, I think? Sorry if I mispronounced a lot of these, French names. So, Lemierre arrives and probes any conversation between Ian and the dead man. It then eventually crosses Ian's name off the execution list. But Barbara and Susan, of course, were still sentenced to death by the guillotine. And while they were on their way there, the carriage that they were stuck in were hijacked by 2 men by the names of Jules and Jean, who then take them back to a safe house. They're told that they will be smuggled out of France through the escape chain. So Jules and John reassure Barbara that they will try to reunite them with Ian and the Doctor. They're then joined by another counter-revolutionary by the name of Leon. Now going back to where the Doctor was, he reaches Paris and exchanges his clothes for that of a regional officer of the provinces. So he heads for the prison to try and find everybody, but he finds that everybody's gone. Ian has, of course, successfully stolen the key from the cell and escaped. Lemire then arrives and takes the Doctor to visit Robespierre to report on his province. Ian follows Webster's words and finds Jules, who turns out to be the man sheltering Barbara and Susan. Of course, Susan, during the story, was, you know, ill in bed. So when Barbara then takes Susan to a physician to try and make Susan feel better, they were then recaptured by the Revolutionary Police, as the physician, of course, was a spy for the police. Ian then meets Leon from earlier, but of course finds out that Leon was only there to, you know, try and, you know, get some stuff out of Ian about some stuff from the Revolution. So he meets Leon only to find that he was basically the mole in an escape chain and there are armed troops waiting for him. However, just as Ian was about to be shot by everybody, Jules then rescues Ian, killing Leon in the process. They return to Jules' house and were stunned to meet Barbara there, finding out that she pretty much escaped from the prison. The Doctor, of course, returned to the prison where Lemire reports that Robespierre wishes to see him again the following day. Lemire assures that the Doctor spends the nights in the prison in order that he remain in Paris for his second audience with Robespierre. And he was still there with Barbara and Susan, and are brought in as prisoners, with Susan being too weak to move. The Doctor, of course, you know, gets Barbara released so she can be trailed to lead the security forces to the core of the escape chain. Meanwhile, Robespierre suspects that his deputy by the name of Paul Barras was conspiring against him and asks Lemire to track Barras to a secret assignation at an inn outside of the city. And when Lemire heads back to the prison, he privately unmasks the Doctor as an imposter. And he insists that the Doctor helps him find Jules' house. With Susan held in prison as a hostage, the Doctor takes him to Jules. Once there, Lemire reveals that he is in fact the English spy James Sterling that Ian found out from Webster earlier. In response, Ian relays Webster's message to Sterling, and Sterling then realizes that the secret assignation at the inn on the Calais Road is where the conspiracy will take place. Of course, Jules, Ian, and Barbara head to the inn and overhear Barras conspire with the young General Napoleon Bonaparte in the indictment and overthrow of Robespierre. The following day, Sterling arranges Susan's release from prison. The coup against Robespierre has begun, and of course Robespierre ended up getting, you know, shot and taken to prison. Sterling then heads for England, and then Jules and Jean lie low as they measure the future. And of course, eventually at the end of the story, the Doctor and everybody else arrive back at the TARDIS. So yeah, that was basically it for the Reign of Terror in terms of its plot. And honestly, watching it for the very first time, it was actually pretty interesting. I didn't think I would actually like the story that much, but I did. There definitely was quite a good amount of action throughout the story. I like pretty much all the characters in there. There were definitely like some quite likable ones. The actors, of course, as usual, do their best. Now, I did, if you guys remember my review from the Censorites last time, I did, you know, mention that Susan was not really, you know, the damsel in distress kind of character that she was in a lot of the earlier Season 1 stories, but Reign of Terror unfortunately brought that back, and yeah, she was definitely still kind of, you know, the same old Susan that, you know, we all know and love. Yeah, she was definitely still kind of like a huge warrior and was like, oh, grandfather, ah! You know? So, that was definitely the only, like, minor downside of the Reign of Terror, in my opinion. But everything else was pretty much good. I generally liked the story. So, as I mentioned earlier, this was a story that has 2 missing episodes, episodes 4 and 5, which were animated by Big Finish Productions. So, the animation definitely was interesting. You know, I was familiar with this company before. They also animated the missing episodes, the two missing episodes for Patrick Troughton's Moonbase, and they also animated episodes 4. Sorry, not episodes. Episode 4 of the 10th Planet. And yeah, their animation I think was a little bit different in this one. Then again, this was their first Doctor Who animation, so I'm not that surprised that this was kind of different than the 10th Planet and Moonbase. But I mean, it was an interesting approach, I would say. The way I would describe the animation, it almost like in the close-ups of characters whenever they talk, like it's almost like, you know, kind of a CGI kind of motion, and almost sort of looks like it's rotoscoped, except I don't know, probably not. But that's kind of what I kind of get at with, you know, some of the close-up shots of the animations. It definitely made the characters sort of look rotoscoped in a way, and kind of in some of their movements as well. But I like the style of it. I definitely think the designs of the characters themselves are definitely super accurate to how they looked in the live-action episodes. So, animation's pretty good. I would give it, probably give it 4.5 out of 5, honestly, for the animation alone. But I'm not here ranking the animations. While the animations episodes 4 and 5 are pretty good, the story as a whole is also very good. I definitely quite enjoy it. Of course, I was that surprised about, you know, the fact that there were some people that definitely weren't the biggest fan of the Reign of Terror. Two major criticisms of the story is, of course, some of the historical inaccuracies, especially, you know, the portrayal of Napoleon and Paul Barras. And also another complaint about the fact that, like, you know, the French characters, which is pretty much most of the supporting cast of the story, had English accents, which David Whitaker, who was the story editor of Doctor Who at the time, he replied to these criticisms by saying that, in his opinion, there's nothing worse than a Frenchman speaking broken English to each other, which I'm thinking, first of all, that's kind of a tad bit racist, but I can kind of see where he's getting at. But I'll be honest, you know, I wasn't super bothered by it personally. It definitely was better than the way that they've definitely portrayed like American characters later on. Like, eventually when I do a review of the Gunfighters, I'll definitely bring up some points related to that. But honestly, I wasn't super bothered by the story. Yeah, I can definitely see where people probably won't like it, but I mean, I personally enjoyed it. Now, one story that I've already reviewed on the show that I could definitely, like, do kind of a compare and contrast to with the Reign of Terror would obviously be the Aztecs from earlier. Those two stories, you know, were definitely the two surviving, you know, pure historicals from season 1. I mean, unless you count The Unearthly Child, but so yeah, definitely those two definitely kind of go hand in hand with one another. I do personally think the Reign of Terror is slightly better, and that's mostly because while the Aztecs like kind of like mostly focuses on like Barbara in a way, which I do like the Aztecs, you know, definitely nothing wrong with that. I do kind of like the Reign of Terror for mostly focusing on, like, you know, several other characters, like, you know, while we definitely have some time with Barbara, we also definitely have some good times with Ian as well. I mean, Susan, as kind of useless as she was in the story, she definitely, like, you know, kind of had some sort of stuff to do. The Doctor, I definitely liked, you know, his part of the story, you know, him dressing up like the original officer was definitely one of the more highlights of the story. I definitely liked the costume that he had, with the feather on his hats. It was pretty neat. Side characters were also interesting. I definitely liked Jules in particular. He was definitely my favorite of the side characters. So yeah, overall, I do think Reign of Terror is an excellent story. I do think it's slightly better than the Aztecs because even though it's 6 parts, it definitely, like, you know, keeps you interested, and there's definitely, like, you know, not only a lot more characters, there's also, you know, a lot more action and suspense, you know, here and there. I definitely kind of like the Reign of Terror a little bit more than the Aztecs. Animation episodes 4 and 5 is pretty good. Definitely unique, something I've never seen before. Kind of wish we've had stuff like this a little bit more often in the Doctor Who animations. But yeah, Reign of Terror is really good. Definitely give it a watch if you want to. Overall, great story. I mean, while it definitely doesn't, like, you know, isn't 100% accurate to the actual French Revolution, it definitely is quite an interesting watch. And for a lot of those reasons alone, I'll definitely give the Reign of Terror probably my highest rating of any Doctor Who story so far. I would probably give it an 8.5 out of 10. Just before I go, little fun fact about this story. So, the broadcast dates of the Reign of Terror was between August 8th, 1964 to September 12th, 1964. And obviously the episodes were broadcasted like once a week in the same time slot. So, episode 3 of the Reign of Terror was broadcasted on August 22nd of 1964, and if I'm not mistaken, that is the exact same day that my grandparents got married, so yeah, I just want to point that out there. Kind of like an interesting little fun fact that I definitely, gotta tell them at some points. They probably won't know what I'm talking about, but definitely kind of interesting. But that's about it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed my little review and discussion of the Reign of Terror. And if you guys did, feel free to give it a like. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more episodes of A Cave from England or just mediocre plush content in general. Also be sure to turn on the notification bell so you get notified each time I upload a new video, whether it's this show or any other show. Leave a comment down below, let me know what you think. That is about it. This time from the Character Workshop, signing out. Next time, we get started with Season 2 of Doctor Who in quite an interesting way.